So I haven't done these in a long time. And there's no better opportunity to start doing this than now, since we were reacting to that long debate. And I'm going to start with the original video. So we're going back a while. I'm going to link the video where the comments are. So the first comment was, how come it's always the tomb of Seti that gets brought up, but never the tomb of Rekhmire and others that depict Egyptians alongside other Africans and other groups, Kushites, Puntites, Keftu, Syrians, and Nilotics? The reason why it's never brought up is because people have no idea. By the way, it goes deeper than that, because you can look at different papyri and all that for evidence of different peoples. Any person who talks about the enemies of Egypt and does not mention the nine bows, of course, being the nine great areas of civilization to which the enemies of Egypt or the opportunities of Egypt existed. If the person doesn't know about this, then of course they're not going to know that they can find all kinds of information where they depict human beings from different areas around Egypt. This, of course, only being one reference to the foreigners of Egypt. Remember, I told you about another name, which is Hyksos. Now, everybody talks about the Hyksos as if it's like, oh, it's one group, the Hyksos that come from Asia. But what they don't know is what the true meaning of the word Hyksos means, which Hek means foreign, and then Sos means ruler. If you say it in the original ancient Egyptian, it's Heka Heset, which means foreign ruler. Now, most people don't even go this far. So, of course, how are they going to even know to reference this to know that there are foreign people that are mentioned all the time in ancient Egypt? Remember, people are mentioned by race in ancient Egypt. It's like, what? What are you talking about? Now, another thing that is utilized by some people are these images, which at first I used to go with what a lot of people were saying until I did my own research on this. And then I realized that the four people on the other side of the Nubian are actually Asiatics that settled in the Libyan region rather than Libyans that were already there, which we can talk about in a different video if you would like. I already mentioned it in my Nubia series, if you've ever seen that before. You can actually see the similarities between these Ramses foreigners, or foreigners that came to attack Ramses' enemies, and the type of people who are depicted in those images. Now, to get back to your question specifically, I want to explain what the nine bows are. So, your question was, how come it's always the tomb of Seti that gets brought up, but never the tomb of Rekhmire? It's, first of all, most people don't even know what the tomb of Rekhmire is, and then that depicts Egyptians alongside other Africans and other groups, Kushites, Puntites, Keftu, Syrians, and Nilotics. There's actually ones that also depict Minoans. There's ones that depict Easterners, Westerners, people from Egypt in different sections, depicting them slightly different from one another, but that's just an exaggeration, and we'll get back to that in another video. The nine bows aren't necessarily nine groups per se. It's not exactly nine groups 100%, but it does show the different foreigners. And by the way, that was also adopted in the Bible, the idea of crushing a bow, which means crushing a foreigner. So here we're given a timestamp, which is 46 minutes. And in this part of the video, I mentioned that Egypt was not empty and that people had to move in, and there were already people in that area if they moved in. So it's referring to that. So we read, that's exactly what they believe. Basically, the whole South Africa issue, but up north, and Asians instead of Boers. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, the South Africa issue is This is an old myth which has now been debunked a lot of times, where the Boers of South Africa claimed that they were the first to arrive in South Africa, and there was nobody in South Africa, and the people who got there later were people who Bantu people who got there late in the game, so maybe around the 1600s or something. But obviously this is nonsense, and yeah, they believe that Egypt was empty. Some people believe that, and they waste their time thinking that. I don't even know why they think that. It doesn't even make any sense, especially since the life and times of the Egyptians is so long. Like literally the life of the Egyptians, you can trace it from around 50,000 BC all the way to like today. You can trace what has happened. It's probably one of the most studied areas in the world because of how fascinating it is. I mean, there's places like West Africa that have not been studied very well, and we're going to probably find a whole bunch of stuff. The next question, one thing we seem to forget when this is brought up is the literary some of the darkest people on earth. Most Africans on every coast are lighter. How is, well, they weren't as dark as the darkest people on the continent, a gotcha or evidence against their blackness? Well, of course, they accept it now, right? They accept that the neighbors of Egypt were the darkest people when it comes to this specific argument, but they don't even accept that either. So to fill you guys in, he's talking about the Nubians being the darkest people on earth, and a lot of people like to say, if the Nubians were that dark, how come the ancient Egyptians weren't that dark since they're also along the Nile and blah blah blah? And the answer is clearly the ancient Egyptians had interactions with Nubians, and them not being that dark is not evidence of anything. Of course, if you look at Africa, if you look at if you just look at South Sudan, if you look at Ethiopia, if we look at any of the places that are very close, you can easily tell that there's a huge diversity that happens around that region in color. So it doesn't mean anything. The next comment is, this is so wild right now. I'm having a debate over Egypt. Search Reloaded. Not really a debate because he brings nothing to the table but AI generated images turning the ancient Egyptians into Chinese. Yes, I said Chinese, as the birthplace of Egyptian civilization in not only Egypt but Punt. So yeah, it's a thing. Who is this person? I would love to react to those videos. By the way, it's not the first time I've heard someone try to turn them into Chinese or Indians. That's a very popular one, by the way, to try and link them to Indians. By the way, that whole AI thing is starting to become a problem because a lot of people are watching AI videos and making their conclusions about ancient Egypt based on AI generated images. I don't know how some people can't tell that some of these are fake. So these questions came with that one commenter. So don't let these racists run you around in circles. He isn't interested in changing his mind. Even Chinese is better to him than African. He's just a troll. You guys need to tell me who this person is. Egypt Search is so garbage at this point. Egypt Search Reloaded, not Egypt Search. These people have chosen their minds. We have to accept it and act accordingly. Where's the debate? On Egypt Search Reloaded, but he's not good at this. He have nothing but AI generated images and his own theories backed by nothing. Is he on YouTube? The next two comments are, why is he talking so fast, tripping on his own words? Well, actually, I fast forwarded it. And yes, he is talking fast, but that's because the other people keep interrupting him. So he has to talk fast in order to make sure that he gets his points in. The next commenter says, don't show, he says Militunis, but it's Minutali's reproduction of SETI. It's garbage. Look at the original tomb. There were no white people in that tomb. Okay, but that's not why I was showing it. I was showing it because the guy referenced it. He said, "Hey, you want to look at that?" And even the girl said, "This is a reproduction. It's not." Nobody accepted it in this video as like a real thing. They just brought it up, so I put it on camera because they brought it up. So the next question is from part 2 of the video. Interesting debate. Can you clue us in on the source so we can review it before the next video? Unfortunately, it's a video that I downloaded a long time ago. The entire channel of this person was deleted because these two guys who made the videos could not get along. Surprise, surprise. And then they just took each other's channels down. The next commenter, Wikipedia is only effective if you have critical thinking skills. All information is cited and you can get the original source with one click. It's just that most people don't do that. Yes, but this is true for any source. Like I mentioned, because a lot of people like saying this thing of like, oh, I get my information from here. And it's like, you know that getting one piece of information does not count as evidence, right? That's just getting one person's information. And Wikipedia has a lot of sources, a lot of information. And it's not just one click. You can press the one click and get to the information, but you should also go and check it out in other places and make sure that that source itself that they sourced is credible. So I understand people being skeptical of it. And of course, critical thinking skills is important in all ways because anybody can, by the way, every single person that has criticized Wikipedia, I've gone and checked their channels and they use Wikipedia. They literally will upload videos being like, even on Wikipedia, you can see this. It's like, but you just showed Wikipedia. What do you mean? There's also something kind of funny about YouTubers who literally, I mean, you're on YouTube, probably the most filled with misinformation platform on the planet, and you're talking about Wikipedia. Come on. Let me ask you a question to anybody who's listening. Do you think you don't need critical skills to watch credible videos on YouTube versus watching incredible ones? So Mr. Black Gold says Nefertiti is not beyond what they could do. It's made out of stucco. It's made so cheaply and doesn't compare to ancient Egyptian monolithic carvings actually made out of durable hard stones, not soluble garbage. No. The Nefertiti bust is way better, and I don't mean just the painting, the paints that they had. I wasn't talking about the paints. The paints they could easily. I'm talking about the shape of it. You do not see anything of that quality at the time. And also, by the way, if you don't know, making things cheaper and making things easier is actually a sign of better. Better, not worse. The fact that we can make things out of plastic today quickly when back in the day they had to go and carve a rock, like that shows that we are doing and we can do things very cheap. That shows that we are more sophisticated. Saying that something is cheaper to do and uh making that equivalent to, oh, it's cheap therefore it's not as good, it's like that's not real. So some people commented on that comment. It's not just the materials used, although you have a point. It's the art style. Egyptians didn't produce realistic art until the Greeks arrived. In fact, most great empires and kingdoms of the ancient world didn't produce realistic art either. Art in the region actually gets even less realistic after Christianity emerges. So this is the real point that I was trying to make. The Greeks didn't make realistic art until they ran into the Egyptians. The Egyptians didn't create realistic art. The Everybody didn't create realistic, not meaning realistic as in looking kind of real, because everybody did that. But I mean, they didn't create with all the flaws and everything on the faces. Most of it was idealistic. Most of it was trying to show people at the peak like a god of some sort, even when they're showing very normal people. I mean, there are some paintings you can see in ancient Egypt where they show, people with all their flaws and stuff, but that's very rare. By the way, I'm not saying if they pulled all their resources, it was impossible for them to do it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that they're pretending like this is a sign of the new style that happened. But if you look at the new style that happened, it's no better than the old one. In fact, it's less realistic than the old one. I mean, just look at this etching or carving or whatever you want to call it. Does this look like real people? I mean, clearly there's a level of cartoonization in here. Now, are there stuff that was added and stuff like that that made it better than the previous art? Probably, but the super thin limbs and everything like that, there's something going on here that's not as well done. And then, of course, you take this image here of Nefertiti, and then you put it with the other bust, and already you're getting two completely different looks. I'm just saying, like, it's not as well done. So Mr. Black Gold comes back and says, Joel Verado, appreciate the input, but it's not entirely true. There are multiple busts of Senraset III, Amenemhat, and Amenhotep, Akhenaten, and Nefertiti that are based on plaster cast molds. You can't get more realistic than a mold of someone's face, and that's going back as far at least than MK. The not realistic trope is just Eurocentric cope, in my opinion. No, it's not. The point is not that they didn't do a good job in depicting the people. It's not even that they didn't do a realistic job. That's why I'm sort of hesitant on using the word realistic. What I'm more concerned about is the style that they used, that it was something that became popular around the same era that these guys started using it. And of course, the way that it's built doesn't make any sense in the ancient world. The whole balancing it with the part of the body removing its arms, almost reminding us of some of the later art that had its their arms removed in Greece and stuff like that. I mean, it's obvious. And so the conversation continues. It's not Eurocentric cope. It doesn't take a genius to notice that most Egyptian art and iconography is not realistic. Their tomb art is literally two dimensional. Of course, realistic is on a spectrum, but if you took a picture of Amenemhotep the third when he was alive, he wouldn't look exactly like his ancient depictions. Okay, so I'm gonna say this: he would look probably very similar, and it probably you could tell like that's him. But what I mean by not realistic is that they don't have the bumps, they don't have pimples, they don't have any of that stuff, which you start to see in other art later in later years. The ancient Egyptians didn't do that. They were obsessed with perfection. And even in the Amarna period, you can see, because we have other examples, that they didn't do that. So comparing it to other versions is like, oh, yeah, they did this in earlier times. What's that got to do with the Amarna period? So he comes back and says, just gave you a list of pharaohs that have busts literally based on plastic cast molds. That's an indisputable fact. Even the triad of Senraset III statues in the British Museum exceed Nefertiti's bust for detail, realism, and accuracy, and they are carved from granite. But hey, believe what you like, buddy. Okay, so let's test it out. So this is Amenhotep, and this is obviously the bust of Nefertiti. And I'll say it again: look at the details. Do you really think that the details are equivalent? Now, I'm not gonna lie; it's pretty good. I don't think that ancient Egypt they did a horrible job in creating these things, but there is an obvious quality difference here that is already there. Now, it's not the biggest, like, oh, it's like 10 leaps higher, but there is a significant amount of quality difference in the way that it is created. Most of it, by the way, is by the neck. If you focus on the neck of Nefertiti, you can see like these people have a very good understanding of the insides of people. I mean, even in the face, you can almost see the muscles of the person molding around. This usually comes from a long understanding of the human body. By the way, saying that this artwork is accurate physically is hilarious. Look at the size of the ears. I want to show you. Okay, so look at the size of the ears of this person, right? And then look at the size of the ears here. Are you really going to say that the ears on the Egyptian one are way more accurate? They're literally pointing forward, which almost never happens in human beings when you're talking about ears. The ears are ridiculous. I agree. Great for ancient Egypt, brilliant. But if you think that the type of art that was done in ancient Egypt can match what later came, it's not true. I mean, the mouth as well. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about this that it would be classified as naive art. Again, I love ancient Egypt, but if you're going to compare like styles and which one is the best, I mean, everybody agrees. If the Nefertiti bust is real, right? If we just take it as like it's real, everybody agrees that it's literally the best looking ancient Egyptian thing that has come out. I mean, maybe with the exception of the Mosque of Tutankhamun, but as just an image itself, everybody sort of agrees that it looks amazing. By the way, I noticed that you're obsessed with what materials it's made of and how it was made. Someone could draw an image with a pencil or with charcoal and it would look more realistic than this bust. I've literally seen things that look more realistic. The realistic has nothing to do with the method they used. I'm not obsessed with that, the method they used. What I'm talking about is the way that it looks at the end. Look at the chin. You can literally see bumps on the chin. Like you can see two bumps showing muscle. You can see the muscle stretching on the skin. If you think this is comparable to any of those that you provided, then you're being silly. I'll be honest with you. Also, tomb art in a discussion about statues and portraiture is a little redundant. Even their writing system was pictorial. Are you going to argue that that proves they didn't produce realistic art too? I don't think that was his point. I think his point was that they were obsessed with symbolic representation, which is why they could have done. I mean, let's just face it, they could have done a better job in those 2D images. They could have added foreshortening. They could have, I mean, have you never seen what 2D images look like? And have you ever seen what they can do in Egypt? Even when they could do better, they literally would go back to their old styles. Again, the other way. It doesn't matter if the art is based on real molds because the sculpture would end up altering them anyways. For example, Egyptian statues and paintings all have abnormally large eyes, a clear stylistic choice that makes the art, by definition, not realistic. Mr. Black Gold says, so I can tell you're not familiar with this subject. I'll respectively keep it moving. Deuces, bruh. Okay, well, you don't have to big fish the conversation. It's kind of annoying, kind of trolly a little bit. And finally, someone says it's obvious that the Egyptians made statues based on a standard. It's very noticeable since they all look alike, and because of how symmetrical the statues and paintings are. What I don't quite understand is why they represented themselves in such an Afrocentric way. Their standards looked towards the black population surrounding Egypt, the somewhat wide and aquiline nose common in Saharan and Great Lakes peoples, the fleshy lips, and the eyes typical of people from East Africa distributed among Nilotic, Nubian, South African, and Ethiopian peoples. I think this is just a great comment to finish it off, and I'm glad that they didn't keep going on back and forth. The next commenter says, I don't understand what she meant by asking what her ancestors did to make them not trusted. Yeah, that's funny. Well, like I said, everything that Europeans have done wrong in the past, they feel is just like, hey, that's just how life works. And then anything that is done wrong by other people, it's like a huge deal. Them colonizing the world and basically flipping countries upside down. That's like nothing. It's like, hey, everybody used to colonize back in the day, but then people migrating to their lands because their lands have been turned upside down. That's like, oh, this is the type of immigration to try and destroy our lands. It's like, what are you talking about? But that's how they operate. Like everything they do is good, and everything everybody else does is bad. The final comment on this video is interesting debate. Can you clue us in on the source so we can review it before the next video? Uh, I'll look for it. So the next question is, geez, this woman makes the debate so exhausting. Yeah, that was one of the worst things about the debate. It's like you can joke around and stuff at time to time in a debate, but if you're just gonna act like a brat the whole time, then you probably should not even debate the conversation. The next one, descendants of those who colonized Africa will eventually have to answer for their ancestors' history once their populations get low enough. They really should be trying to make amends now while they still can. Uh, is that a threat? Yeah, but it's true. And, I have to skip one comment because there's a word on there that I can't show. The next one, what is even Radio One doing at this debate? He's being lectured at this point. I don't really understand the comment, but I think what you're trying to say is they're just over talking him at this point. If you're saying that, then I agree. The next one is, I just found this Worski guy. He's clearly a racist. I mean, well, I from the little that I saw, and also the fact that he's palling around with racists, would make that same conclusion. But you know how he's gonna claim that's not true or whatever. Sadly, the black Egyptian defender has terrible presentation style. Well, unfortunately, it's like a pop-up debate and he wasn't ready, and all there's a lot of stuff that's happening. His computer wasn't that good. There's a whole bunch of stuff that was happening. Which is why I think he still did a good job. If you watch the entire video, you can tell that he's working, with one arm tied behind his back, and he's still beating them backwards. The next one, he still had stronger points, but not thorough enough. He should have shown the scholars debunking the DNA study. Now, but that's the unfortunate part. His computer was, I mean, this is a long time ago, but his computer was not up to it to do that. And that's one of the problems. The next one, all they have now is a DNA study. Literally, ever other form of evidence is unreliable to them, lol. And they don't even have that. Like I've already shown, there are some DNA studies that have already shown black African DNA in Egypt. So let's not pretend that they've got DNA on their side as if like it completely disqualifies black Africans. The next one, yeah, but are still people who rely solely on DNA. Huh. The next commenter, they don't even have that bogus DNA study. That 2017 Schooneman study had serious problems with its methodology as well as the conclusions. It was picked up by every major media outlet while the previous Armand Amami's DNA study was put on the shelf. The racism is too obvious, ignored, and these folks shouldn't make us feel bad about pointing out when we see it. I'm proud of this Radio On brother for coming with receipts. I just wish that he would mellow himself out and chill with the okays. Other than that, he showed just how ignorant a lot of these so-called professionals really are, and how it's better to do your own research. True facts.